Hi, welcome to the Online Jewelry Academy. I'm Professor John Ahr and I'm your instructor. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful hairpin. It's made from 24 gauge copper sheet metal, and it starts out pretty flat and lifeless and turns into this beautiful organic shape with all sorts of beautiful curves to it. Now, how did I do it? Through anticlastic raising. What's that, you ask? Well, think of a Pringle. Pringles represent exactly what anticlastic projects are all about. This is where you have two curves that meet at a right angle. In other words, there's a curve going this way on the top, and on the bottom there's another one going this way. And that double curvature gives this thing a lot of strength. That's how they survive in the can during shipment. But there's one thing you should know about this. Anticlastic raising can be something kind of pricey to get started doing. And that's because the tools are kind of expensive. But the good news is, in another video I showed you how to make your own sinusoidal stake. This will be a good money saver. And this will work just as well as the commercial tools that you can buy. In fact, this wooden stake will kind of diminish the amount of finishing that it takes to make your project beautiful. With these steel stakes, there's a little bit more planishing to do. Now, as you can see, the stakes come in a variety of sizes. You could make your own in a bigger version of this or something smaller if you like. It just depends on what you need to accomplish your goals as a designer. Now, I'm going to show you this project, but these principles can be applied to a wide variety of different types of blanks that you cut out. And you could make earrings, bracelets, necklaces, all kinds of jewelry. You need to experiment. Okay, the most important thing to tell you about the tools before we move on is that when you strike your project, you need to hit it with the right hammer. Now, if you're working with steel, you need to use a plastic mallet. Now, this is a cross-peen Delrin hammer, and it's soft, and you want the soft to go against something hard. Whereas if you're using this stake that we've made in another video, it's soft, it's made out of hardwood, and we would want to use a hard hammer against your project. So here I have a steel cross-peen hammer. Now remember, these hammers may need a little bit of finishing to make the curvature of the edge of this cross-peen end nice so that it doesn't leave a mark. But that's easy to accomplish with a little bit of sandpaper and a little bit of elbow grease. All right, so let me clear this away and let's get started. Okay, so I've set up the sinusoidal stake into the bench vise, and I've selected a hammer to use with the stake. Now remember, you need to use a metal hammer with the wooden stake. Now, an important aspect of the hammer is that the angle of the cross-peen hammer needs to be more acute than the smallest of the angles that exists within the tool itself. And this one's just fine. Now, the blank is a story all unto itself. When you create the blank, you need to think ahead as to what your desired end result will be. And in this case, we know that we want this spiculum to close. We want the seam to match up. In order to do that, I needed to cut a blank where both of these sides are parallel to one another. So I suggest that if you're preparing a model or a pattern, that you use graph paper, something with clear lines that you can measure out and mark exactly where your blank should be cut. And you can attach this to your metal using anything from rubber cement to glue stick. But you do want to concentrate on straight lines when you want things to close. The other thing is we don't want a really sharp point at the end because we're making something that's going to go through the hair and touch the scalp potentially, and you don't want to make anybody bleed. So this should be a rather dull point at the end. You can always modify this later though with files if you need to. Now, you always want to work with a well-annealed blank. Now, sometimes You may want to jump from one process to another though, and not anneal, because maybe you've only hit along the edges and then you want to work the middle. Well, if you want the edges to maintain their shape, then you would not anneal before striking in the middle, because if they're work hardened after being struck by the hammer, they're not going to change or shift. But if you want to affect the whole thing, or you want to move on to the next step, then you will need to re-anneal. Okay, now the first thing that I want to do is I want to check my stake here and find a place where I can position the blank and I can easily hit close to either one of the two sides of the blank, so that the blank will have the edges go from being flat to just being curved to the edges of the stake. Now, whenever you're working with a hammer, be sure that you put on eye protection, because you never know. Something could come up off the stake, or the hammer could do something crazy, so be sure you protect yourself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in a larger trough area. I think I'm going to come over, let's see, I'm going to come to this one at the far end. Now, you can position yourself any way you want to. You can turn the blank around and handle it from any direction. In most anticlastic raising operations, say where they're making a bracelet or a necklace or an earring, they would probably bend the piece down and hold it from the bottom, because they're trying to access that full possibility of curvature that you get from a tool like this. But we don't want to do that. Remember, we're trying to make something with a gentle curve that matches the curvature of the head. Okay, so here we go. Remember, I'm hitting just the edges at first, and all I'm going to do is just lightly hit them, and you can hear I'm making contact with the stake, and I just want to give the edges a slight curve. Okay, so we have successfully brought these edges up just slightly. Now, I do want to start to create a middle furrow that establishes the center axis of this piece, and to establish the kind of curvature that I want it to take on. What I need to do is find an arc on the tool that will cradle the two edges, but give me the ability to hammer on the center and smooth it into that furrow that's going to establish the center axes. Okay, so let's look here. This one looks pretty good. I think that this one is my best option. So now I need to be conscious of giving it a little bit of a bend. So I'm going to just slightly take it over the edge of the tool, just a little bit, to give it that little bit of a curvature to it. Okay. So I finished making the curved sides, and then I just finished making the central furrow. And this is a raising process that really moves the metal. And you can see I've got a nice curvature already established on it. Now this is far from being finished. It needs to be worked several more times in order to perfect that curve and bring it closer to being closed up. But at this point, I should probably anneal it again so that it make it malleable and more workable. All right, I've taken the piece out of the pickle pot and brass brushed it, and of course it looks great. Now, just a word about pickling. Whenever you do something where you need to anneal a project or solder on it, always be sure to pickle it and clean it and brass brush it before you return to work again. It'll help you to avoid making mistakes, and it'll help you to avoid transferring that yucky oxidation to your tools. Now, when you anneal something during this process, sometimes it will relax and release the tensions in a way where you'll take it out of the pickle pot and you'll think, wow, it looks a lot better. Well, you've relaxed and released all of the work hardening that's built up from the hammering process. And the great thing about that is that I've got a nice curvature to the piece, and it doesn't have any rippling really, which is great. And that's an advantage of working on the wooden stake. You can avoid a lot of that rippling. But it's still pretty wide open. Now remember, what I did was I went down near the sides, and then I went down the center to establish that furrow that gives it the central axes. Now what I want to do is I want to hit somewhere in between the center furrow and each of the sides. And that will expand the furrow round the back and start to planish that curve so it's nice and smooth and no rippling. Now, those ripples could be planished out later, or you could even sand them, but it's best to just avoid them to begin with. Okay, so what I need to do over here is I need to find a place on the stake where the piece will fit in and have both sides supported. Now, it seems like we've gotten to the point where I can come to this end part over here. And I want to make sure the sides are supported, the bottom is touching, and I want to make contact in between. Okay, so let me do that very quickly. Okay, so I avoided it torquing any further. I now have two areas along this back curve where the piece is work hardened. So it's stiff, it's not going to move, and that's good. I don't really want it to move. Now what I can do is I can move to the next step, which is where I begin to close the walls down. Right now they're about here. I want them to gently start to come up. And what we're going to do is we're going to get them to the point where we get them almost together, and then we're going to hit on top to bring them together to shut that seam down. Now, at this point in the operation, you're going to want to move to working on the side of the tool. And I'll continue to work with a metal hammer. If you have, say, a ring mandrel or a bezel mandrel, or even a metal version of the sinusoidal stake, you could work on that with a soft hammer, like a Delrin hammer, or wood hammer, or rawhide mallet even. If this is the only tool that you have and the only hammer you have, it's okay, you're going to be fine. All right, so working towards the camera, what I want to do is I want to just position the piece against the edge of the tool, and I'll hammer from the outside. So it's basically pushing, the hammer's pushing this side while the tool or the stake is pushing the other side. So here we go. Okay, now I've done both sides, and here we are. And you can see it's much more curvaceous. It's going in two directions the way it should be, round this way and round this way. And all I need to do is just continue to hit on the side a little bit more and bring that gently up and closer together. So I'm going to work on that. Okay, I've gotten our piece to the point where the walls are almost closed. You can see that they're about 2 millimeters apart from one another. And I've re-annealed the piece to make that last push directly on top of the seams super easy. So in this next step, what I'm going to do is I will support the piece in one of the smaller troughs or grooves of the stake as I hit directly on top of the seam in order to bring the two sides together to shut it down. The next phase will be shaping the fan portion, but I'll wait to show you that. All right, so let's take care of this seam first. All right, so I'm going to support it in the most narrow channel of the stake, and very lightly I'm going to tap with the flat face of the hammer on one side at a time. And take your time with this. Don't rush. If you get too excited, you're going to flatten it out. Okay, now let me show it to you here. Maybe the overhead camera can pick this up. You can see where it's pretty equidistant all the way up and down. And that's because the blank was cut with parallel sides, number one. That's the most important thing. How you start determines how you finish. And you can see that I've pretty much applied equal pressure on both sides in order to maintain the curve. Now it's looking a little bit flat right there, but I can probably save it by hitting this side a little bit harder to bring that over to close the gap. Okay, so at this point, what I want to do is I really want to go slow and hammer directly on top of the seam. Okay, and I'll come back the other side. Okay, look at that. Perfectly shut down. It's closed. You could actually run a solder seam there if you really wanted to close it up, but it's closed. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do in order to finish this is to just bend the top of the fan area backward. And you can do that on one of the humps on the stake that exists between one of these troughs. And I would suggest start with your biggest one first and go slowly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit directly on top, and what I'm going to try to do is push the metal so that I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap, and I'm going to push the metal down to meet the edge of the hump. And since these are so curvaceous and perfect, it will hit the edge of the stake and make it nice and rounded. Okay, let me just refine it a little bit. And there we go. So I could take a little bit more time and get this curvature perfect. And if I want to sink this a little bit deeper in the center, I could. It'd give it sort of an Art Nouveau flavor to it. Now, in terms of finishing this piece out, you can sand it, polish it, tumble it. If you tumble it, just be aware of the fact that because it is hollow, you may get some shot stuck inside of the spiculum. You could also add a patina to it to give it a little bit of color, or you might even heat stain it if you do make it out of copper. And this should be smooth enough that it will easily glide through a lady's hair and not saw her hair off. I hope you have fun making this project. If you like this video, be sure to like it, and maybe you might want to subscribe right now. Just hit the button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. All of our videos are available all the time on onlinejewelryacademy.com, and they're organized by topic. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you'd like to support the production of future videos, we also have fan funding available, and there's a video on that too. Thanks for watching.